White judge sentences poor boy for his skin color, but the photo on the desk silences him in court. He was already guilty the moment he walked into that courtroom because his skin wasn't white. It wasn't the law that weighed him down, but the eyes of a man who believed the law belonged only to people who looked like him. 12-year-old Malik Jefferson stood quietly at the defendant's table, legs barely long enough to reach the floor from the wooden bench. His mother, Tanya, clutched his hand with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the marble walls like they could protect her child. The room smelled of old paper and polished wood, of tradition too often used as a weapon. The prosecutor hadn't even started yet, but the air already held the verdict. Judge Randall H. Whitmore III had presided over that courtroom for almost 30 years. He was known as a man of order, of rules, of conservative values. Behind closed doors, people called him the hangman for the harsh sentences he handed to defendants who came from the wrong side of town, wrong color, wrong income, wrong everything. The charge? Malik was accused of stealing a wallet from a gas station. Hard evidence. No fingerprints, just the grainy footage of a small black boy in a hoodie. That was enough for the local police to knock down Tanya's door at dawn and drag her son from his bed. He had been at home doing homework, but the system didn't ask for an alibi. The system asked for a target. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, social workers, and a few quiet activists filled the benches. But most watched like it was entertainment. Another ghetto kid, another case. Nobody expected a twist. Nobody expected history to crack. The prosecutor, a clean-shaven white man named Curtis Langley, presented the evidence with a detached voice. Surveillance video, blurry. Witness statement, vague. The only thing clear in the whole case was Malik's hoodie. Your Honor, while the video may be grainy, Langley said, the suspect matches this boy's size, build, and attire. The store owner said the boy was black. My office believes that's sufficient for a finding of delinquency. Tanya stood up. My son was home. He didn't do this. He's 12. He was. Ma'am, Judge Whitmore interrupted, his voice stern. You'll have your turn. Sit down. His gavel echoed like thunder. The gallery went silent. Tanya lowered herself slowly, tears gathering but never falling. She wasn't allowed to cry here. Not in a place that called itself justice, but never saw her as more than an interruption. Then came the moment. Judge Whitmore looked over the bench, down at the trembling boy in front of him. I've heard enough, he said. In light of the evidence presented, I am prepared to render my verdict. He stopped. His eyes drifted, just for a second, to the corner of his desk. There, half buried under case files, was a photo frame. A smiling black boy about Malik's age beamed back at him, missing one front tooth, a baseball glove slung over his shoulder. The photo had been mailed anonymously to the court last week. The bailiff placed it there, assuming it belonged to one of the clerks. But Whitmore knew exactly who the boy was. His grandson, or rather, the grandson he never acknowledged. The product of his estranged daughter's defiance, falling in love with a black jazz pianist and raising a child without his blessing. He hadn't spoken to her in years. But that smile, that child, it was unmistakable. His lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time in 3 decades, the hangman hesitated. He stared at the boy before him. The courtroom was still. Even Langley looked confused. Tanya noticed the judge's trembling hand. I need a recess, Whitmore muttered. 15 minutes. Gasps rippled. Gavel slammed. He disappeared into his chambers. Behind the thick oak door, Judge Whitmore leaned over the sink, splashing water on his face. The photo was still in his hand. His fingers gripped it too tightly, as if trying to hold something already gone. He thought of his daughter, Claire, of how she cried the last time they spoke. If you can't love my son, you don't deserve to be his grandfather. He had slammed the phone down. He hadn't seen her since. Now he was staring into the same eyes, a different boy in a courtroom built to destroy them. Back outside, the spectators whispered. Why'd he walk off like that? Was it a health thing? No way. You see his face? He looked spooked. 15 minutes turned into 30. When Whitmore returned, his robe seemed heavier. He sat down. Slowly. Miss Daniels, he said to the defense attorney, his voice low. You stated the boy had an alibi. What was it again? The lawyer blinked. He was at home, Your Honor, with his mother. And was that corroborated? I didn't have resources to bring witnesses, Your Honor. He nodded. then turned to Tanya. "Ma'am, are you willing to testify under oath?" She stood, confused. "Yes, I'll swear on anything." And she did. This time, people listened. She spoke of the night how Malik was sitting at the kitchen table with his math homework, how they argued over whether he could have an extra cookie before bed. She even showed the homework sheet he left on the table, time-stamped on his learning app. The judge asked no further questions. He looked at the prosecutor. "Do you have any objection to dismissal?" Langley hesitated. "No, Your Honor." The gavel came down. Case dismissed. The room exploded not with noise, but with silence. A stunned, breathless silence. Tanya collapsed into her seat, sobbing. Malik turned to her, whispering, "Did we win?" She nodded, holding him close. "Yes, baby. Yes." Whitmore didn't leave the bench. He stared at the photo frame, now resting openly before him. In the end, it wasn't the law that changed him. It was the face of a boy he didn't know he could love staring up at him from a photo he had tried to ignore. He had sentenced hundreds of black boys. But today, for the first time, he saw one. Outside the courthouse, the sun blazed hot against the cracked sidewalks. Tanya walked with her arm wrapped tightly around Malik, her other hand clutching the crumpled math worksheet like it was sacred scripture. Around them, people passed by, most unaware that justice drew, fragile, trembling justice had quietly unfolded behind closed doors. But not everyone missed it. Among the small group that had lingered near the courthouse steps was a local freelance journalist named Darian Cole, a black man in his early 30s with weary eyes and a notebook full of stories the world didn't want to hear. He had sat in the back row of courtroom 6B every day for 2 weeks, watching as case after case tore through the lives of kids like Malik. But this time felt different. This time, he had seen something crack. Darian approached cautiously. "Ma'am, Tanya, right? Don't mean to intrude. I was just in the gallery. I saw what happened." She looked up at him, still dazed, still unsure if she was dreaming. "What do you want?" "I just want to understand," he said gently. "That photo. What did it mean to him? Why did he stop?" Tanya glanced down at Malik, who was watching the cars pass with tired eyes. "I don't know," she said. "I think. Maybe he saw something he hadn't seen before. Or maybe he remembered someone he forgot." That night, Darian wrote until sunrise. His article, titled "The Day the Hangman Blinked," went viral before noon. He didn't name names, but the story carried power. A white judge, a poor black boy, a photo, a silence, a choice. It spread across social media with the fury of a storm that had been gathering for decades. Inside the courthouse, Judge Whitmore sat alone in his chambers, reading the article under the glow of his brass lamp. The words stung, not because they were false, but because they were honest. Too honest. His staff avoided his gaze all morning, unsure of what version of him they would meet now. He reached for his phone, his fingers hesitating before dialing. It had been nearly 7 years since he called Claire. It rang twice. "Dad." Her voice was cautious. "I saw the article," he said. A pause. "So did Elijah. He asked me if the boy in court looked like him." He closed his eyes. "He did. He does. I told you, Dad. He's not a mistake." "I know." Another pause. This one longer. Thicker. "Do you want to see him?" Claire asked. Whitmore's throat closed. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I do." That Saturday, Judge Whitmore drove himself to a quiet neighborhood in Baltimore where his daughter now lived. Her house was small but warm, with wind chimes by the porch and chalk drawings on the sidewalk that read, "Be kind," in rainbow colors. When she opened the door, Elijah stood behind her, hugging a baseball glove. He was missing a front tooth just like the photo. "Hi, Grandpa," Elijah said, voice shy but clear. Whitmore didn't know how to respond. So he knelt, slowly, and opened his arms. The boy hugged him like he hadn't done anything wrong. The story should have ended there: a judge redeemed, a boy freed, a family reunited. But stories about race and justice in America don't tie up so neatly. Not when systems are still in place. Not when scars run deep. 3 weeks later, Malik's case reappeared in the news not because of him, but because of what followed. Civil rights attorneys, galvanized by Darian's article, began examining Judge Whitmore's past rulings. A group called Justice Reclaimed filed a motion to audit 20 years of his juvenile court decisions. Patterns emerged. Stark ones. Black defendants, on average, received significantly harsher sentences than white ones charged with similar offenses. The numbers were damning. Whitmore was summoned before the Judicial Review Committee. He sat across from them, older now not in years, but in spirit. He did not deny the findings. I was wrong, he told them. For a long time, I thought I was being tough on crime. But I was being tough on color. One committee member, a Latina judge from Philadelphia, leaned forward. Why now? Why admit this now? He looked down at the photo in his wallet. Because I can't look my grandson in the eye and pretend I didn't help build the world he has to survive. They suspended him pending further review. Some demanded he resign. Others called for criminal investigations. The public was split. Some praised his honesty. Others called it too little, too late. But Malik? Malik just wanted to ride his bike again without fear. He and Tanya were invited to speak at town halls and schools. She spoke of broken trust and broken doors. Malik mostly stayed quiet, but one day, at a local youth center, a little boy asked him, "Were you scared?" Malik nodded. "Yeah, but not just of jail. I was scared that grown-ups would never believe kids like me." The room went still. Then the little boy asked, "Do they believe you now?" Malik looked at his mom. "I think some of them do," he said. "And that's a start." Meanwhile, Darienne's article was picked up for a short documentary. He interviewed other black families who had crossed paths with Judge Whitmore's court. Some still carried the weight of those decisions, children lost to the system, opportunities taken. But others saw the change in Whitmore as a sign of hope. The judge himself refused all interviews. But he agreed to one final action. 6 months after Malik's case, he stood at a podium inside the same courtroom where it all began. Only now, he was a guest. "I won't defend the man I was," he said, "but I will do everything I can to unmake what I helped build." He pledged to dedicate the rest of his life to juvenile justice reform. Not as a judge, but as a volunteer, a speaker, a witness. "Because the law can be blind," he said, "but people shouldn't be." The crowd included lawyers, students, and a few skeptical activists. But it also included Tanya and Malik. Afterward, Whitmore walked up to the boy he once nearly condemned. "I read your essay," he said. Malik blinked. "You read it?" "You wrote, 'If the system had looked at me like a person instead of a problem, maybe I'd still believe in it.' That broke me." Malik didn't smile, but he nodded. "I still don't believe in the system," he said. "But maybe. I believe you're trying." And that, somehow, was enough. The photo remained on Whitmore's desk until his retirement. Elijah grew up knowing the story not as legend, but as reminder. And Malik? He kept the old math worksheet, the one that saved his life, taped to his bedroom wall. Not because he loved math, but because it proved he was there. Autumn came, and with it, a shifting tide in the city of Baltimore. What began as a single moment inside courtroom 6 by glance at a photograph had snowballed into something far larger than anyone had expected. The case of Malik Jefferson became a national conversation, not just about one boy or even one judge, but about a legal system built on generations of imbalance. A young state senator named Camille Rivers, herself a former public defender, seized the moment. She introduced what would become known as the Jefferson Youth Equity Act, a sweeping legislative reform bill aimed at addressing racial bias in juvenile sentencing, mandating third-party oversight panels, and providing additional funding for defense attorneys working in underserved communities. "This isn't about punishing one man," Rivers said in a press conference. "This is about unbuilding a machine that was never meant to protect all of us equally." Malik was invited to stand beside her during the announcement. He wore a blue blazer that didn't quite fit, a loaner from the church down the street. He didn't speak that day, just stood tall beside a podium he couldn't see over. The moment was symbolic but real. His presence was living proof that a face, a name, a single story could force a crack in concrete walls. At school, things had changed. The kids who once whispered about his arrest now sat beside him in science class, watching the viral clip of the judge dismissing his case. Some still looked at him like he was something fragile, but others asked questions. Smart ones, brave ones. Did it feel like the world was against you? Were you angry? Would you forgive him? To each, Malik gave different answers depending on the day. Some days he was angry. Some days he wanted to forget. But most days, he just wanted to live like a regular kid again, except now. He wasn't regular. Not anymore. One afternoon, as he walked home from school, a police cruiser slowed beside him. His heart kicked. The memory of that early morning raid never really left. But the window rolled down, and the officer inside, an older black man, smiled. "You're Malik, right?" He nodded cautiously. "Just wanted to say I read what you wrote in the paper. Keep telling the truth, kid. It matters." And then the car rolled on. That night, Malik sat down with a pen and notebook. For the first time in his life, he wanted to write something that wasn't for school. He wrote about how silence can be dangerous, about how people can hurt you without touching you, about how it felt to be seen, not as a kid, but as a case file. He wrote, "Being poor is hard. Being black is harder. But being both, and being right, and still being treated like you're guilty, that's the part that sticks." The essay ended up published in a teen literary journal. The editors sent him a $20 gift card. Tanya framed it anyway. Meanwhile, Judge Whitmore kept to his word. No longer allowed to preside from the bench, he took a quiet role behind the scenes, offering guidance to policy writers and participating in youth reform panels. He gave speeches not as a moral authority, but as a cautionary tale. One of his speeches was titled, "The Day I Saw My Grandson in a Stranger." It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it made many in the audience uncomfortable in the right way. He spoke plainly. "For years I believed I was colorblind. But the truth is, blindness isn't justice. It's neglect. It means you're ignoring what the world refuses to." He was heckled at times. Protesters called him out, reminded him that apology wasn't restitution. And they were right. He never fought it. Instead, he kept showing up. A year passed. The Jefferson Youth Equity Act passed through committee and onto the state floor. Debates were fierce. Conservative lawmakers claimed it was anti-police, while others called it a first step toward balance. In the end, a handful of swing votes, one of them a Republican whose nephew had faced juvenile charges for a prank gone wrong, pushed it through. Governor Salazar signed it into law in front of a crowd of students and educators. Malik and Tanya sat in the front row. "I don't know what's ahead," she whispered to her son. "But today, they said your life mattered." But even as change unfolded in courtrooms and capitals, Malik's world still bore cracks. His uncle Jarrell, a delivery driver, was stopped one evening for a broken taillight. His car was searched. No charges, no apology. Just another reminder that Malik's story hadn't erased the danger. Just because one boy had been seen didn't mean the world had changed. It made Malik ask a harder question. What does justice even mean when it comes late? One afternoon, he found himself invited to speak at the same courthouse where his case had been heard. The youth center had organized a panel, and he was the closing speaker. Tanya sat in the front row, fingers clutched together, whispering prayers like she always did. Malik stepped up to the podium, now taller, his voice deeper. "When I was 12, I sat in this room thinking I'd go to jail for something I didn't do. A judge looked at me and saw a hoodie, a charge, a problem. But then he saw a photo." He paused, letting the room go quiet. "The truth is, I shouldn't have needed to remind anyone that I was a child. I shouldn't have needed to look like someone they loved to be seen as human. But that's what it took." He looked up at the gallery. "I'm not here because I was special. I'm here because I got lucky. And I want to live in a world where being lucky isn't the only way to survive the system." People rose to their feet. Some clapped. Some cried. Afterward, a law student approached him. "I'm going into juvenile defense," she said. "Because of you." Malik smiled. It was the first time in a while he felt like maybe he wasn't carrying it all alone. One winter morning, Judge Whitmore passed away quietly in his home. Heart failure, the obituary said. The news barely made headlines. Just another old man gone. But at his funeral, Claire spoke. He was a hard man. Too hard, for too long. But he tried to unlearn it. And in the end, he met his grandson with open arms. I can't tell you if that makes him a good man. But it makes him a man who changed. Malik stood in the back, arms crossed. He hadn't known whether to attend. But Elijah had asked him to come. After the service, the two boys stood alone by the gravesite. "My grandpa told me I should listen to you," Elijah said, wiping his nose with his sleeve. Malik smiled softly. He listened, too. At the end, he listened. The wind blew. Snowflakes swirled. Neither said anything more. But it was enough. The courtroom now bore a plaque on its door, in memory of every child misjudged before they could speak. Malik eventually grew up, went to college, studied sociology and criminal law. Not because he wanted revenge, but because he wanted reform. Real reform. He never forgot the day a man's silence saved him. Not because it should have, but because it did. And every time he entered a courtroom, every time he looked into the eyes of a kid sitting at the defendant's table, he remembered, justice isn't blind. It's watching. And so is he. Years later, Malik Jefferson would find himself standing at the edge of a courtroom again, not as a defendant, not as a symbol, but as an attorney. It was a small courtroom in a public defense office in Southeast D.C., the kind where the ceiling tiles buzzed with bad wiring and every bench creaked with fatigue. But to Malik, it was sacred ground. Here, stories could be rewritten, not erased, not undone but reshaped into something truer. His client that morning was a 13-year-old boy named Devin, arrested for shoplifting a bag of chips. Devin didn't have a record. His shoes were too small. His eyes didn't meet anyone's, not even his mother's. Malik had seen this scene before, only now he was on the other side of the table. As the judge entered and everyone rose, Malik's breath caught, just briefly. A flicker of memory, the gavel, the silence, the disbelief. But this judge was a young Latina woman, and she nodded respectfully as she looked at Devin, not through him. After the hearing, Malik approached Devin in the hallway. "You did good in there," Malik said. Judge seemed to listen. Devin shrugged. "Doesn't matter. They never really see me." "I did." The boy looked up. "I saw you," Malik repeated. "Because I was you." He gave Devin a card. "Call me anytime, even if it's not about court stuff." Devin held the card like it was gold. And maybe, in a way, it was. Back in Baltimore, Tanya still lived in the same house, though the kitchen had a fresh coat of paint and Malik's old math sheet, faded, wrinkled, still hung in the hallway. She worked part-time at a local community food pantry now, telling anyone who'd listen that her son was a lawyer, and yes, the one from that story. Sometimes people still asked, was that really all true? And she'd say, more true than you want it to be. Claire Whitmore had become a public school music teacher. Her son, Elijah, now a teenager, was deep into jazz and wore his grandfather's old watch to every performance. He didn't remember the courtroom, but he remembered the photo. It now sat framed in their living room, beside a copy of Darian Cole's book Justice, with a Pulsia bestseller that chronicled stories like Malik's from across the country. Darian had moved on to documentary filmmaking. His latest project was titled Before the Gavel Falls. The opening scene was an interview with Malik. "What would you tell your younger self?" Darian asked him. Malik took a long pause. "I'd say, they're going to try and make you feel small, like you don't matter. But you do. Even when they pretend not to see you, you still shine. And one day, they won't be able to look away." At a youth justice conference in Chicago, Malik gave a keynote speech. Hundreds of teachers, reformers, and young leaders filled the auditorium. His speech wasn't flashy. It wasn't rehearsed. It was honest. "I'm not here to inspire you," he said. "I'm here to warn you. That change doesn't come from one verdict. It doesn't come from a headline. It comes from years of showing up, again and again, even when it hurts." He told them about the boy in the courtroom. He told them about the judge and the photo. And he told them the truth, that the system didn't change because it wanted to. It changed because people forced it to look in the mirror. After his speech, a woman approached him. She wore a simple white blouse, her face aged by time and quiet grief. "I was a clerk in Whitmore's court for 17 years, she said. He never mentioned that photo to anyone. Not once. I didn't know what made him stop that day. Until now." Malik nodded. He saw someone he couldn't unsee. She touched his arm gently. "Thank you for giving him a second chance to be human." Time passed. Malik started a non-profit, the Scene Projecta legal advocacy program for wrongly accused youth of color. Its mission was simple. If the world refuses to see them, we will. It grew rapidly, fueled by donations and volunteers and kids who had stories like his, some even worse. He hired young lawyers from the same neighborhoods they fought for. Some were once clients. Some were once statistics. Now, they were warriors. But the world didn't stop being cruel. There were more cases, more headlines. Another boy in Missouri, a girl in Texas, a child in Detroit who was arrested for disturbing the peace because he cried too loud when the police took his father. Each story added weight to Malik's chest but never silence to his voice. And yet, one moment returned again and again in his mind. Not the verdict, not the courtroom, but what came after. It was the first night he had slept after his case was dismissed. He remembered lying on the couch, still dressed in the same clothes, too exhausted to change. Tanya sat nearby, dozing off in the armchair. In the darkness, he whispered, "Mom?" She stirred. "Yeah, baby. I don't want to be scared no more." "You won't always be," she said, voice warm, steady. "You sure?" She reached over, touched his cheek. "I promise." He didn't know then if she was right. But now, years later, he knew she hadn't lied. He still got scared, but he wasn't afraid to fight. On the anniversary of his trial, Malik returned to the old courthouse. It had been converted into a youth education center, one of the final requests in Whitmore's will. A plaque on the wall displayed the judge's quote, "Justice isn't blind. It's afraid. And we have to teach it to be brave." In the front lobby, there was a new exhibit, faces of the forgotten, a photo installation of children who had been failed by the system but survived it anyway. And among them, tucked in the middle row, was a photo of 12-year-old Malik Jefferson. In a hoodie, eyes tired, chin lifted, and beside it, a quote from his essay. "I was a kid, not a threat. I just needed someone to say it out loud." As the years turned to decades, and his hair began to gray at the edges, Malik never stopped showing up. He showed up for every kid who had been told their life didn't matter. He showed up for every mother waiting outside a courtroom with hope breaking in her hands. And every time he stood before a judge, every time he told the story, he carried a photo in his wallet. Not of himself, but of Elijah. Because that boy, that photo, reminded him what justice could look like when it was finally personal. And that's how Malik Jefferson changed the world. Not by screaming, not by begging, but by being seen, and never letting anyone look away again. The end. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.